Hi everyone, welcome to our new podcast channel. Obviously, if you are watching this on YouTube, you would know that we also have a video version of the audio episodes that you would listen to on iTunes. So if you're listening to this on iTunes, you can go to YouTube and you can watch the video version of this episode. So the Management Consulting iTunes channel is not going to be covering items we cover in our other podcast channels. For example, we have the Strategy Skills podcast, which does deep dives into real engagements, and we talk about the mechanics of setting up a study, the mechanics of how to do analysis. It's very detailed on the analyses and how to go through running an engagement. We have the Case Interview podcast and Management Consulting podcast, which prepares people, mostly students, but also experienced hires for case interviews at major firms like McKinsey, the Boston Consulting Group, Bain, and as well Deloitte and so on. That looks at the skills needed to pass a case interview, but it also teaches the foundational skills to understand strategy. For example, if you needed to complete a decision tree on an actual strategy engagement, the tools we teach you on how to build decision trees, the tools we teach you on how to apply judgment, on how to do estimations, we call those foundational skills. We teach that in the Case Interview podcast channel and also in the case interview material on our website. But this channel, this new channel, Management Consulting, is about the mechanics or the business of running and growing a consulting firm. So we're not going to discuss the issues related to how to structure a study, how to break down a study, how to prioritize studies, and so on. We'll leave that for the Strategy Skills podcast. We're not going to discuss foundational strategy skills, aka how to join McKinsey or BCG or Bain. We're going to leave that for the Case Interview podcast channel. Here, we're going to focus only on the business of running and growing a consulting firm and the issues that you would face, largely due to generating sales, but also building out capabilities, generating new intellectual property, and so on. And it's a difficult task. So I think as a starting point, because we tend to focus heavily on strategy and operations, I want to point out that this program is not going to be exclusively focused on strategy boutiques or strategy practices at large firms. This program is going to be applicable to any type of consulting, whether it's operations, technology, digital implementation, organizational, human resources, even other types of consulting that may not fit within the traditional management consulting sphere. If you are consulting, whether it's a food consulting business and so on, all of this would apply because the principles are roughly the same. Of course, I'm going to use examples from a traditional consulting sphere because that's where I grew up, right, as a partner at one of the major firms, and I'm later running a very, very large boutique firm. So I'm going to draw all of that together. Now, as a starting point, I think I want you to take some time here to acknowledge what a remarkable thing you are doing to launch a consulting firm. And I think people who are either launching their own businesses or running the office of a major firm, because, for example, if you're running an office for, let's say, KPMG in some smaller location or smaller country, it's as if you are running your own firm by yourself because you're so far away from the traditional support structures that those firms have. It will be the same for McKinsey, the same for BCG, the same for Bain, the same for Deloitte, and so on. So whether you're working at one of these big firms in a tiny office, or whether you're launching your own business or have launched your own business, I think it's important to pause for a second here, go to your refrigerator, take out a nice bottle of wine, maybe a nice red, and pop it open and have a drink and celebrate the fact that you're doing something that's pretty hard to do. And oftentimes when you read about support for consulting firms, people don't take the time to acknowledge how hard it is and what a great achievement it is to actually start on this journey. Now, of course, if you are driving, I would not be having a glass of red or white. I would maybe leave that for when you park your car in the garage, get out, and are nowhere near a steering wheel. But the gist here is that what you're doing is pretty impressive. I've been a consultant my whole life as a partner at one of the major international firms, then at a boutique firm, which I had led through a turnaround. And of course, I've been advising many consulting firms, large, small, boutique, and so on, since I left. It is a very unique industry to be in. You don't get enough support. It's an unregulated industry. So it's an industry whereby a lot of people are doing it, but it's almost as if you're alone 99% of the time, even though you know other people are doing it. Even if you get together with them and talk to them about the challenges you are facing, it's still a lonely journey. What I'm hoping through this new program is I don't think I can remove all of the loneliness you'll face. I wish, but I'm sure I couldn't do that. But I want you to know that there's somewhere where you can go go where there's a dedicated support on the business of launching, growing a management consulting or any consulting business for that matter. Now, I put up this quote because while I talk about celebrating and not feeling down about things, I put up this quote from Teddy Roosevelt. It's a great quote. I'm not going to read it. You can read it. But what I want to say here is that whenever you launch a consulting business, it is a scary proposition because essentially what you're saying is that I'm going to go to someone, usually someone you don't know, because it's unlikely your contacts of networks can be so broad that you are going to know in advance everyone you're going to serve. So you're largely going to go to some people who you don't know, some you do know, and you're going to ask them to give you money so that you can advise them. You're like a therapist. You're like a counselor to business people. And for better or worse, it's an industry that is looked down upon. It is looked down upon. I mean, unless you are working at one of the big, gigantic international firms, if you're a consultant by yourself or part of a smaller collective, you're treated as if you are someone who is trying to break into something revered, but you haven't yet made that transition. If you try to explain to people you're a consultant, they assume that you have maybe not been as successful in industry. That is why you are consulting. They feel you are trading some outdated knowledge for fees. The bottom line is that you don't get the support you want. In fact, you are criticized. People treat you as if you've not made it, which is why you are consulting. I've been to some events, of course, when I was a partner at one of the major firms, whereby you meet boutique consultants, and some of them are very confident, but there are others who are almost embarrassed to say that a consultant, it's almost as if they've failed. So what I want you to get comfortable with is that don't worry about what people say about you. You know, I think a Dr. Seuss line goes something along the lines of, the people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter. And then he says something else, but let's just stick on those lines. So I want you to not worry about why you're doing consulting, what people think about you, how your friends are reacting towards you. You're doing something quite important. You are helping businesses become better. You're helping them become more efficient, become more profitable. As they become more profitable, they pay more taxes. Those taxes get recycled into the economy and everyone benefits. So it's an important role. It's a difficult role. I'm not going to take that away from you. And I know that many of you listening to this have been through difficult times whereby you've had to cut expenses. You've had to maybe not take your family on vacation. You maybe have had to not buy clothing for a few years because being a management consultant, especially an independent or even within a smaller firm, is difficult. When I was a partner, I helped some of the offices turn themselves around. I've helped start up new offices for the firm. It's difficult to do that, even if you've got the backing of a multi-billion-dollar international consulting firm behind you. It's difficult to do that. I can only imagine how hard it must be if you're by yourself or just one or two or three people. So as you go through this process and you're going to be criticized and people are going to say, you know, why you work at this tiny firm, or you're not like McKinsey, or you're not like Deloitte, or you're not like Accenture, whatever the criticism you're going to get, remember you are doing it, and that's what matters. So expect the criticism, but don't take it personally. And even though it's easy for me to say don't take it personally, I know you are going to take it personally. But if you feel someone's telling you something, post a comment here and I will respond to it through a future episode teaching you how to manage things. But the point is, you are not alone here, right? The process of growing a consulting firm is pretty daunting, I would say. I mean, trying to build a consulting firm that is sustainable is very, very hard. And I've put together a rough overview of what this is. So let's start with the new ideas and capabilities, right? As consultants, we sell an idea that we believe is going to help the client fix a problem, avoid a problem, push a problem into the future. There's nothing wrong with pushing a problem into the future and if you're not able to fix it now. The point is we have some ideas, some capabilities. Even in implementation, we're selling the idea that we can implement this to get a result better than if the firm did it alone. So we do research. We write up previous work we've done. We market. Now, marketing is actually a way of developing new ideas and capabilities. By taking an idea to a client and getting their feedback, you adjust the capabilities you have, right? So capability may be you know how to reduce costs in a supply chain. You may have a new unique way of developing strategy, a corporate strategy, and so on. Client discussions and marketing go hand in hand. As you speak to clients, you find new things they want to do, problems they want to solve. As you take ideas to clients, they obviously respond and you figure out new ways of doing things. You then take all of that and integrate it into your work and you package it as a service you want to sell to a client. You then need to make sure clients know you have this capability and they understand the value that sits behind that capability, right? So you have to have a website. Now, you don't have to have a website. I want to just be clear about that. A website is not necessary, but we can talk about about that later. You can, but you don't have to have articles, videos, audio, programming, describing the work you've done at clients, discussing issues. You may have to have an office. Sometimes you don't need an office. So this thing about having an office is a bit overrated. I can talk about it more. But for example, when we were setting up offices, we didn't always have a physical office. Sometimes when a partner goes into a new country, they work out of their apartment, which is very common, right, until they set up things. You may publish books. Again, not necessary, but sometimes they help. You sometimes email clients. You have social media, business cards, and so on. Now, all of this is marketing to pursue a client. If you're an insider and you want to understand how do you go about picking the clients, how do you go about prioritizing the clients, is there a scorecard for you to follow and so on, then you should follow the new program we have called Growing a Consulting Business, which has very detailed steps in terms of how to go about developing a, for lack of a better word, a sales relationship, or developing a relationship that leads to a situation where a client will give you money, for lack of a better word, right? Now that leads to sales, which is multiple processes of preparation. You've got to prepare for the sale. You've then got to have meetings with the client. There's going to be some proposals. There's going to be some negotiation. Then you have to deliver the project. You have to use some type of technology, whether it's a laptop and so on. So technology is pretty an important part here. You've got to prepare for the delivery. You've got to onboard the client, prepare them for what's going to come. You've got to run the engagement itself. You've got to develop a benefits case, which is what is the value of doing the study. If there's no value to you having done the study, why are you there? And then you've got to sell on, which means that you've got to get new work at the client. Once all that's done, you've got to do post-delivery work, which means that all of the work you've done at the client, you've got to write up that study so that you can explain it to other clients, your colleagues, and future employees you have. You've got to create templates. For example, if you've developed some new technique at the client, you've got to then convert it into templates you can use in other studies. You've got to extract the data from this previous engagement so you can build databases. If you've developed new concepts, you have to write it up. You have to use this to generate new sales. You've got to populate your content library. And of course, training and recruiting, which are very painful. If that's the way you're growing your business, you have to go down that route. This is what you have to do to build a consulting firm. Whether you do all of this at the same time or you a younger firm and you don't do all of this, the point is you have to make a decision on whether you have to do these things or not. If you are generating sales, are you going to do it the way most firms do it, which is based on a time and material basis, for lack of a better word? Even McKinsey and BCG is largely time and material. Or do you have some kind of model whereby you are charging a client for recurring sales, which is now the holy grail? Even McKinsey, even Deloitte are going down that path. They're not very good at it, but we'll talk about it more. Do you continue working the way you always had or have if you are the senior partner in your firm? Because at a certain point, as you start bringing in clients, you have to move to a fixed cost model whereby as a person bringing in sales, you are not generating income for every hour you work, but you have leverage whereby if you are working 10 hours a day, if you were working 8 hours a day 1 year ago and you only had one sale per month, and you're now working 8 hours a day, but you need something like 3 sales per month, that's known as a fixed cost model because the amount of hours you work are fixed, but you're producing more output. Your team, on the other hand, almost always going to be on a variable cost model whereby they get paid as they work, but you have to introduce efficiencies for that. Of course, you could break that by going to some kind of recurring revenue model, and we'll talk about that possibly in future episodes. Now, if you want to see examples of how all of this is done and to see some examples of best practices and how to generate insights and so on, for a limited time only, we have advanced preview episodes of some of our best content. So it's for a limited time only. If you go to firmsconsulting.com, that's firmsconsulting.com, and you opt in to either the pop-up, one of our articles, or register for free on our website, we will send you a series of emails with complimentary episodes from some of our insider programs so you can see how this is done at the highest level of operations is done at some of the most elite firms in the world. Now, this is the overall process. As we go through this channel, we're going to zoom in on different parts of it. And what I'm hoping here is that obviously it's a huge amount of things I could cover. And I don't want to just cover things that I know are useful, but may not be useful to you at this point in time. So if you have a question or you want a particular portion covered, my recommendation is to post a question in the comments. We won't respond in the comments, but what we will do is we'll use the comments as input for future episodes. So this is your overall model. It's a model that's very, very difficult to maintain. I've got lots of friends who are ex-McKinsey, ex-BCG, and so on. partners, some of them very senior partners. But I can tell you right now that every single one of them, these are very senior guys who launched a consulting business. They won't tell you it failed because they don't want to use that language, but they stopped being consultants. Their little boutiques all closed up shop. I don't know of anyone who successfully set up a boutique and made it sustainable. Yeah, if you speak to them, they'll always tell you, well, I got a better offer and so on. But obviously, if they had a better offer in corporate to return, that means that the boutique was making less money or had the potential to make less money or was less attractive than the corporate role they had. And for a lot of them, they didn't even have an attractive role in corporate. They just retired. So even with that firepower, even with being a McKinsey partner, this is hard to do. Does that mean it's impossible to do? Obviously not. When you leave a firm like McKinsey and BCG, you're used to certain things running in a certain way. In fact, you forget just how much support the firm is giving you. When you go out by yourself, all of the support the firm was giving you has disappeared. You've got to recreate that support mechanism, which is hard to do. But not impossible. And in fact, a lot of the things that the big firms do, you shouldn't do as part of a small firm. And that's what we're going to cover in this program. Obviously, this is going to be based on my experience. If you've listened to the Case Interview podcast series, the Strategy Skills podcast series, if you've read our books, if you've been to strategytraining.com, strategytv.com, firmsconsulting.com, if you followed the programs like Growing a Consulting Firm, Partnership Memoir, Rebuilding a Consulting Practice, the very famous Andrew program, a typical McKinsey BCG engagement, you will understand on what we are drawing the lessons in this podcast channel. But we're not repeating what's in those programs because I want to introduce new content. Every time we put out material, we want to build our asset base in terms of intellectual property. So I'm drawing out the things from the Andrew program that are relevant to you. So for example, the Andrew program is a program whereby we helped a senior manager at a major professional services firm, so not the biggest, in the tax practice, leave the tax practice because it wasn't a sustainable career path for him, and become an equity partner, and not just a partner, but an equity partner within 3 years by building the innovation division. Now, whether or not you work at a large firm, whether or not you're interested in innovation, whether or not you're interested in management consulting, that program is worth following because you can follow all of the steps we took to help him figure out what to do, how to convince people to back him, and so on. Those are useful no matter what industry you're in. So if you want to do this in the right way, you got to learn the underlying skills that were applied. And we're going to be picking out all of the very useful things and drawing it into this program. Now, I put together a little bit of a self-assessment here to give you a sense of where you should lie. Now, this is not an exact science, meaning that this is an approximation. There are always, if you look at anything in life, it follows a normal distribution, also known as a curve distribution, a Gaussian curve. This is what the average firm that's roughly 1 to 2 years should be doing, roughly 1 to 3 years should be doing, roughly more than 3 years should be doing. You may be an outlier, that's fine. But approximately the first 2 years, even the first 3 years of your firm, you're only going to be focusing on delivery and sales largely, and what happens after delivery, which is preparing for a sale. So when I meet people who are running boutique firms and they're talking about selling and recruiting and training people and they're just 1 or 2 or 3 years old, I think they're doing the wrong thing. For one thing, the first 1 or 2 years goes so rapidly, it's so stressful, it's so nerve-wracking, and it's so unstable. Why would you want to hire people? And what are you going to get them to do when you hire them? You know, to hire someone means that not only can you earn enough billings to pay for your fees and costs, you have to earn enough to pay for someone else's fees and costs. And I've once spoke to a boutique firm founder who told me that he's not going to take a salary. He's going to work for very little, if anything, and he's going to hire someone to do the work. And I'm thinking to myself, but why would you do that? Because if you hire someone else, you have to pay them roughly a market rate. They're not going to work for free. But if it's yourself, you don't have to pay yourself a market rate because it's your business. You can invest all of it back into the business. So for the first 1 or 2 years, you just focus on sales and delivery and accumulating cash, building the systems and processes that you need. But certainly marketing, new ideas, capabilities, recruiting and training, I mean, you shouldn't be doing any of that. Mainly because most people setting up consulting firms come from some consulting firm. So they bring some intellectual property with them. Now, the half-life, the value, the relevance of intellectual property decreases very rapidly. So within 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 years maximum, whatever intellectual property, whatever methodologies and frameworks you took from your previous firm, they're going to become less and less relevant until they're irrelevant. But at least for the first 1 to 2 to 3 years, you can build a business out of that. So when people say they're developing new ideas and capabilities, yes, you need to do it, but you don't have to start with that. Unless this is new to you and you've tried and you failed and you need something new. Now, if you want to see how to develop develop new techniques and new frameworks and so on, obviously you can go into strategytrain.com, but a specific program to watch would be how to develop deep insights in Insider, because that teaches you how to develop a new methodology every time you're faced with daunting odds at a client. Now, if your firm is 1 to 3 years old, even then you shouldn't be recruiting. And I know it may be counterintuitive, but it's hard to build a business. I mean, I've been involved in several offices being launched, several offices being turned around with the firm, in Latin America and Asia and so on. And I've also led a boutique firm with 150 plus people with multiple offices, and it's difficult to recruit people. So for the first 1 to 3 years, the big part here is that after 1 to 3 years, you usually burn out your existing relationships. And I mean burn out, I don't mean that they don't want to see you again, although that may be the case in some situations, but usually that you've mined them or you've done as much as you can at those few clients, that even though you can do more, sometimes clients just don't want to give the same work to the same consultant because they want to introduce fresh ideas. So for example, if you've done the same type of operations work at one client, after about 2 to 3 years, they just may want fresh blood, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Clients want new thinking. The executive you knew may leave. You may make mistakes. You may suffer from burnout. For a number of reasons, you have to find new clients, which is where the marketing comes in. And you need new ideas and capabilities. Now, the new ideas and capabilities thing is interesting, and I'll talk about that more later. But basically is that even if your idea is useful, what's going to happen is that after 1 to 3 years of speaking about that idea, you are going to become fatigued about speaking about it. So even if a client is interested in it, you are going to approach it like, well, I've said this a million times before, so I'm just going to skim through it. And it becomes a process. It loses the enthusiasm. Everyone says that's not true. And I've seen it like so many times. Now, I've got friends who are consulting partners, McKinsey and so on. And I always tell them, but why are you speaking to this client like they understand the basics of how to solve a problem? And they look at me and say, well, it's obvious. It's so easy. Yeah, it's easy to you because you've maybe discussed it for 20 years, but for everyone else, it's not easy to them. But what's happened is that partner has become fatigued about speaking about something that he's always been speaking about. So to him, he starts moving the goalposts and starts making a concept more and more complicated, not realizing that's not what the client wants. So it's going to happen with you as well. And rather than making an existing useful concept more and more complicated, my advice, if you want to refresh a concept, make it simpler or introduce new concepts. As you get to a firm being more than 3 years old, maybe 4 or 5, then you need to consider recruiting and hiring. But what you recruit and hire depends on the business model you take. In the Insider program, I talk a lot about this concept of billing for time and billing on recurring revenue. It is basically the way consulting is going in the future. So as maybe a good ending point to today's episode, what I want you to think about is the challenges you face as someone running the office of a major consulting firm in a far-off, isolated, new geography. It's difficult. I mean, I've got clients who are partners for consulting firms, the audit firms, and even the boutique firms in new regions or regions that are such small economies that the London, the New York office, the Chicago office doesn't really support them. You have challenges. I want to hear about it. If you're a boutique firm somewhere in Michigan or Chicago, wherever in the world you are, think about the challenges you face. Think about what's stopping you from having a good month, a good year. And if you have those questions, post it in comments, and I'll be very happy to build that into the program. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.